What's up, everybody? Welcome to a new edition of the Spurs Report. I'm your host, Shiva Patel. It has been a busy summer for the Spurs so far, as we are right now into the Summer League. In my last episode, I broke down the first round draft picks of the Spurs. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about the free agent moves the Spurs did. They've had a pretty busy offseason and a lot of stuff that's been happening. But before I'm going to do that, I want to talk about the draft picks, specifically the second round draft picks for the Spurs, because I talked about Jaden Quaidens, talked about Terrace Reed, the first round picks, but I didn't get to really dive into their second round picks. And first of all, I'm really impressed by both of them. Jacoby Gillespie from Tennessee. He's a big guard. He had some, or not a big guard, excuse me. He is 6 foot, not the biggest guard, but he has a lot of moxie. He has a lot of confidence, and he plays bigger than he is. The Spurs drafted him with the 42nd overall pick. He's 6 foot, 182 pounds. He made some big shots for Tennessee as their point guard in the toughest conference in college basketball, the SEC. He was a 2025-2026 SEC Newcomer of the Year. What was all SEC first team. And in general, he's a really good player. He ranks seventh in points per game, second in assists per game, and third in steals per game. I really think he could come in and play like a Jose Alvarado, Alex Caruso role for the Spurs. He'll be a backup, obviously, and most of his time will be spent in the G League. Maybe the Spurs have injuries coming back and forth and playing for the silver and black. But I think overall, he could be a really big pest on the defensive side of the ball because his ball pressure is really good. He has good hands, good instincts. He could steal the ball. Not only that, he has a lot of offensive game, more than Alvarado and Caruso have, in my opinion. He could create his own shot. He could score from all three levels of the floor. He can play make. So I was really a big fan of this pick. I think the Spurs got great value for him at number 42. And then the next pick was Malik Brown. So Malik Brown ended his career with the Duke Blue Devils before starting with the Syracuse Orange. And Malik Brown is not the offensive player. He's a four. Jacoby Gillespie was a guard, a one or two. But Malik Brown is a great defender. He has long arms. He plays bigger than he is. He has really good instincts. He has a high motor. He's 6'8", 217 pounds with a great wingspan. He was the ACC Defensive Player of the Year last year and the ACC Sixth Man of the Year. And even though the ACC wasn't that great of a conference, he made a great impact with Duke, particularly on the defensive end of the floor. And not only with his ball pressure, but his blocking shots, rebounding. He can guard multiple positions. If you get him switched off on a guard, it's not a mismatch. He has the foot quickness to be able to stay with the guard and contest the shot. So I just wanted to talk about those draft picks. I really like them, and so far they're doing pretty good in Summer League, as well as Terrace Reed. And hopefully Jaden Quaintance can get healthy towards the second half of the season so we can see him fully healthy for the end of his rookie year. So now let's talk about the Spurs summer, since they ended the season, unfortunately, losing 8-5 games to the New York Knicks in the NBA Finals. Well, the big news that dropped was Victor Wembanyama signs his rookie extension. It's a max extension. He is going to be making 5 years, $252 million. That sounds like a lot, and it is, but he also took a little bit of a discount because he could have gotten up to the $303 million value, but he decided to sign the extension this summer rather than after his fifth year, because then the Spurs could potentially save $50 million over the next 5 years, because he sees that that in order to be a champion and get over the top like the New York Knicks did, you have to have really, really good role players. And that's what the Knicks did exactly. Jalen Brunson took a discount. He took $105 million, something like that, a couple summers ago. And that allowed them to get Mikal Bridges, sign OG Anunoby, sign Karl Anthony Towns, and those players to be able to stick together, because the one player is not taking in much salary and you can kind of spread it around. So I think Wimby deciding to do this really shows his commitment to winning, commitment to wanting to be in San Antonio, and also knowing the landscape of the NBA with the first apron, second apron stuff. You cannot get too much of the luxury tax, because then they'll start taking away your draft picks and you have less roster flexibility. knowing that how cerebral of a player he is. He knows that if he can just sacrifice just a little bit of money, that can really help not only the Spurs in the long term, but help him get to his ultimate goal of winning multiple championships in San Antonio. So very happy the Spurs got him secured. We knew that was going to happen, but for him to be able to take a discount, really, or less money, I should say, really says a lot about him. And he posted on Twitter on Friday, "Spurs family, I'm here to stay, whatever it takes." And this picture is actually of him. He's in France right now. So the head coach is on the left, Mitch Johnson, RC Buford, the president, Peter Holt, the owner, then the general manager, Brian Wright. So they all came and they signed the extension in his home in Paris, France. So congrats to Wimby. You know he's in the lab working to get better, watching film, and I cannot wait to see the great things he does going forward with San Antonio Spurs. But that was not the only big move or signing so far the Spurs have had this offseason. In free agency, they signed forward Tobias Harris. And I really like this move because I think Tobias Harris is still a very much underrated player. He's 33 years old. He's a veteran, and those veterans are very, very valuable. So he signed a 2-year, $31 million with the Spurs. That deal became official July 6th. He was on the Pistons last year, and they finished with the number one seed in the East. He was actually their second best player. Duren was supposed to be Jalen Duren, but he struggled. So Tobias Harris was the running mate for Cade Cunningham in the playoffs. In that first round, come back from 3-1 behind against the Orlando Magic. And then in the second round, all the way up against the Cavaliers, he was their second best player. He was making big shots for them. He's a guy that's a forward. He can play the 3 or the 4. He's strong enough to guard bigs in the paint. Also is good at stealing the ball, good at contesting shots. He's a great defensive player, but on the opposite side of the ball, I really like how lethal he is from the mid-range. He gets to his pull-up mid-range shot on the elbow. He is automatic from that. And then if players try to come up on him, defend him at the mid-range, he has enough quickness to be able to get by them and also finish in the paint. He also is a guy that you cannot leave open from three-point range. So I think this is a guy that can not only be a secondary scoring option for the Spurs, being a 4, because then that takes away like the big man from the opponent. So that opens more space up for Wemby in the paint. But he is a veteran. He's been on multiple teams. He's been deep in the playoffs before. He's a guy that knows how to take care of his body. He's a great teammate, a great locker room guy, and also gives you the production of the offensive end of the floor and the defensive end. And he has experience doing that. So I like this move. But before I can even talk about this even further, I'm not going to lie. I really wanted the Lakers forward Rui Hachimura. There were some rumors that the Spurs were a great position for Hachimura and they were aiming to get him. But then the reports come out, I think the Spurs kind of saw the reports that Hachimura really wanted to stay in Los Angeles, but he did not end up signing with the Lakers. He ended up signing a 2-year, $20 million deal with the Los Angeles Clippers, which was less than the market was going to be spent on him, because he was going to go for like 50, 60, maybe even $70 million. But I think that other teams figured out that he wanted to stay in LA. And I wanted him because Rui Hachimura would have been the perfect addition for the Spurs team, because he's a more talented offensive option than Tobias Harris. Not as great of a like a defender as him, but he's a better offensive player than Tobias Harris, and he's a lot younger, and he can put the ball in the basket. But again, like I said, it looked like he wanted to stay in LA, so then the Spurs pivoted and end up getting Tobias Harris, which is a pretty good option that you can get in free agency. Now let's move on to some of the players that we re-signed from the team. What about Harrison Barnes? He comes back on a 1-year, $8 million deal. He did not play much in the playoffs. He played more during the regular season. He started, and then Julian Champagnie took his starting spot. But Harrison Barnes is another guy that you have a veteran in the locker room if needed upon. If you have injuries, knock on wood, he's a guy that could come in, could still score, even though he didn't shoot as well as he usually shoots. I think that's why he lost his starting job to Julian Champagnie. But he's still a good defender. He'll make the right play. He's a good passer. He's not a guy that he's not a selfish kind of guy. So I have no problem with him. You get him on a team-friendly deal, 1 year worth up to $8 million. Let's see maybe if they can flip him for during the trade deadline, or are you going to stay on the Spurs the entire season? But again, you can never have too many veterans on your team. And then another Spurs player that they re-signed from last year, Julian Petty. And this is the guy that, he was bouncing all around the league. The Sixers end up cutting him, and then he lands on the Spurs. He was only making $5 million last year. Last year, he like I said, he took the starting job from Harrison Barnes. He averaged 11 points a game, about almost 6 rebounds a game, shooting 44%, from the field. And this is a guy that I still think he's a little inconsistent, because when he's hot, he is hot. Like you could see when he sees the ball go to the basket, he can really get on a heater. But just in general, I think that he was a little bit inconsistent. But it's hard because the Spurs had to re-sign him because he's one of the best shooters on the San Antonio Spurs team, and you need floor spacing, especially in today's NBA. So this was a guy who was a no-brainer. They signed him to a pretty team-friendly deal, 3 years, $42 million. He had a good year shooting from threes, but like I said, he would have some games that he was cold, but also he would have some games that he couldn't miss and would really add a lot of value to the Spurs. Or excuse me, he signed for a 3-year, $45 million contract. But he's a guy that overall is another good locker room guy, unselfish player. Like I said, he's a good rebounder. He can play defense. He's not the best defender, but at least he tries to play defense. He's not really a guy that gives you a lot of playmaking. You kind of know what he does. He needs to get better at putting the ball on the floor when teams run him off the 3-point line. I think that's what teams started doing. But in general, I think this was a good signing because the Spurs are really doing a good job of staggering their contracts to avoid the second apron. You do not want to be the second apron in the NBA because you are going to get punished. And they're doing a really good job with the salary cap gymnastics of trying to create as much flexibility, on this team as possible, signing Tobias Harris and also extending some of their own guys that are on the team as well. So Julian Champagnie, I actually think this is a pretty team-friendly deal. I thought it was going to be more that he was going to command, but you bring him back. He's he's a shooter. He's a guy that can get hot. He's a guy that defenses have to respect from the 3-point line. He's always going to command that attention. And at times he does open up the floor for the other guards to be able to attack the paint, like a Fox, like a Harper, like a Stephon Castle. So he does add a lot of value for the Spurs. 3-point shooters in the NBA are a very high commodity. And this is a guy that if Spurs didn't re-sign him, another team would have probably re-signed him, even though he had another year with the Spurs at only like $4 or $5 million. So I think it's better that you sign him now than next year if he has a really good year on the last year of his contract from his previous team. Then he would command even more money than the $45 million the Spurs would have to pay him. So I like that they were looking ahead and got the deal done a year before than they actually had to lock up one of their main players in the playoffs, because he was a player that he was your best shooter and teams had to really guard against. So, and you can never have too many shooters on your team. Just ask the Oklahoma City Thunder, the New York Knicks, etc. Another signing, the Spurs signed Jordan McLaughlin, the backup point guard who the Spurs acquired, I think, last year from the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'd like that because you never can have too many guards on your team, and with injuries, etc. With Harper, Fox, and he's another veteran guy that could come in. And I have to give him credit. I believe was it game 4? It was either game 3 or 4. He came in and made 2 3-pointers against the Minnesota Timberwolves when it was not garbage time. So this is a guy that, I think it was good that they, re-signed because like I said, you can never have too many, point guards on your team. He's a veteran. He's a good locker room guy. You get him on a 1-year, $3.3 million deal, and a guy that, can get in the ears of, Dylan Harper and can really push the players to become better in practice. He's more of a practice player. And I really like that because you need kind of those players, those veterans, on your team. So it's been a very interesting, offseason so far for the Spurs. Of course, there's going to be more news coming up because, the buyout market still has to happen. So let's see which players get bought out and you can get them on very team-friendly deals. I don't think the Spurs are going to be making any major signings coming up. I don't think as hard as Luke Cornett tried to get paid for LeBron James, LeBron James is either going to go to the Cleveland Cavaliers or maybe even the Golden State Warriors or the Philadelphia 76ers. So I don't think, Spurs are going to get LeBron. I don't think they should get LeBron. He's a guy that doesn't really fit our timeline. He's a guy that, is going to want the ball in his hands. So I like that, no matter how hard Luke Cornett tried to recruit LeBron. But one other thing I would like to say, I also love the fact that they did not go for the Kawhi Leonard bait, because there was rumors or reports out there, excuse me, that Kawhi Leonard was interested in signing a contract extension with two teams. Those two teams were the Toronto Raptors and the San Antonio Spurs. Of course, we know he was part of both teams. He joined both teams, getting drafted by the Spurs, and the Spurs trading him to the Toronto Raptors, where he won an NBA championship. But I really like that. I think Kawhi was trying to put feelers out for the Spurs, and I think the Spurs put some feelers out for Kawhi Leonard. But I don't think he's another player that really doesn't fit their timeline. Even though he's been more healthy the last few years, he's still an injury-prone player, a player that you have to extend, give a max contract to, and we already have some of those guys on max contracts now with Wemby, De'Aaron Fox, etc. You're eventually going to have to pay a Stephon Castle, a Dylan Harper, so he wasn't really make sense for the Spurs in that aspect. And then, of course, with the whole team drama aspect as well, with, he goes with the Clippers. He divides the locker room a little bit. He's a quiet guy. He's not a selfish player, but he's a little bit of to himself, a little, even though he still puts up great numbers. But you don't know with, his mindset, off the court's going to be. You don't know with his injury situations. He just didn't make sense for the Spurs. And now it's even coming out that the trade between the Raptors and the Clippers, because Kawhi Leonard is now part of the Raptors, that the NBA put that trade on hold, and they're still looking at that trade because of the whole Kawhi Leonard, salary cap circumvention thing that he was part of with the LA Clippers, etc. So that's a whole messy situation. I don't think the Spurs wanted to get involved in that. Like I said, the NBA put a hold on the trade. They're right now investigating it. So we'll see what happens with that. But I think the Spurs were smart to not touch Kawhi Leonard, and as a result, they were either going to sign Rui Hachimura or Tobias Harris to be kind of their 3-4 guy in the offseason. And I think they did a good job of landing Tobias Harris. So I just wanted to put out there. I know most Spurs fans didn't want Kawhi Leonard, but again, Kawhi's camp, I think we either wanted the Toronto Raptors or the San Antonio Spurs. And it really was just one team that was highly interested in and willing to make a trade for him, and that was the Toronto Raptors. And I think the Spurs are very smart to kind of hold off the Kawhi Leonard trade and sign a combination of Tobias Harris, and then re-sign your guys like Julian Champagnie, Harrison Barnes, and of course Victor Wembanyama. So props to the Spurs front office for that. Well, thank you so much for watching this episode of the Spurs Report. I will be back as any news pops up, the rest of this offseason, whether it's Summer League, the rookies are playing well so far as the Spurs are in Vegas, any players that they sign either with the buyout market and free agency, as we get closer to the NBA preseason, it will be here before you know it. The offseason, the NBA gets shorter and shorter and shorter. So, and already a lot has happened, within the league. So I'll be back for that, as the season is going to start in October, but some of that preseason stuff starts in like September, that just a couple of months away. So I will be back for reacting to any news that happened with the Spurs. But overall, I like the path that they're taking this offseason. I think they're on the right track, and the Spurs should be even better, in my opinion, in 2026 than they were in 2025. Well, before I leave, be sure to subscribe to the Patel Pick and Roll Sports YouTube channel. Like and subscribe. Also, click the bell for any notifications for when we upload a video. We're going to be doing many of these Spurs reports going forward as we get closer to the season. Any big news breaks with signings, etc., Summer League. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.